Hi, everyone. I'm Kimberly Price. We're so happy that you're here, and we want to thank the Library of Congress for putting on the National Book Festival today. I want to give you just a few bits of information about who I am and the organization that I represent. I'm the president of the Junior League of Washington, and it's our mission to advance women's leadership for meaningful community impact through volunteer action, collaboration, and training. You may see some ladies up front with white hats on, and you may see a bunch of white hats when you go to the book signing lines and to the roadmap to reading, as well as the booksellers lines. The Junior League of Washington has supported the Library of Congress's National Book Festival for 20 years, providing over 7,000 women to support and volunteer at this event, which is the equivalent of 46,000 hours or $2.3 million. And we're very proud of that. We love the National Book Festival. We love the Library of Congress. And we're very thankful that they would allow us to continue to support them. At this time, I'm going to introduce our moderator, Heather Montilla.
Thanks, Kim. Welcome to Lie, Fight, Gatekeep. Girl versus the Power. I'm Heather Marie Montilla. Today's conversation features Angeline Bolle, author of Warrior Girl Unearthed, and Amélie Wen Zhao, author of Song of Silver, Flame of Night. Welcome. A bit about me. I am the National Director of PBS Books, a consultant, a substitute librarian in my local library, and an adjunct professor at Michigan State and Eastern Michigan universities in their arts and cultural management program. But most important, I'm a mom. My kids are here somewhere, and welcome. I live in Chicagoland. I have 3 kids, a husband, a dog, and a bird. So PBS Books, I don't know how many of you know about it, but we have a collaboration, an amazing partnership with the Library of Congress. Every year we produce 10 virtual conversations to promote this amazing event. They are all streamable, as is the content you'll be seeing today throughout the whole book festival. So if you miss something, you can still catch it, don't worry. So how many of you grew up watching PBS? How many of you grew up going to the library? Both of these spaces are places where intellectually curious people thrive. And I'm guessing you are here today because you are curious and enjoy reading. Is that accurate? Well, here you are at the curiosity stage, and we're going to hear from 2 young adult authors who empower their young heroines to stand up against power. So let's welcome the authors. But before I do, I want to just remind you, there will be time for questions and answers at the end of the program. I also encourage you to join us in Hall DE for book signings. They're in both 10 and 11 lines. So let's meet the authors. Angeline Bolle is an enrolled member of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians, is a storyteller who writes about her Ojibwe community in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. She is a former director of the Office of Indian Education at the United States Department of Education. Bolle lives in Southeast Michigan, but her home will always be on Sugar Island. Her debut novel, Firekeeper's Daughter, received many awards, including a Prince Award, William C. Morris Award, Walter Dean Myers Award, and an American Indian Youth Literature Honor. Okay, well, the other author, I know you all know who it is. It's Amélie Wen Zhao. She was born in Paris, France. She grew up in Beijing, where she spent her days reenacting tales of legendary heroes, ancient kingdoms, and lost magic at her grandmother's courtyard. She attended college in the United States and now resides in New York City, where she is in finance during the day and is an author by Night, fantasy author. In her spare time, she loves to travel and spend time with her family in China, where she's determined to walk the rivers and lakes of just old lakes, and just like the practitioners do in her novels. So I'm so excited to welcome both authors to the stage. Welcome, Amélie and Angeline. I'm gonna go there. Well, I'm so excited to be here with both of you today. This is such a wonderful honor for me. Both of you have had a tremendous year. Congratulations. Your books are extraordinary. I know, how many of you out there have read their books this year? And I know if you haven't read it, after this conversation, you will certainly pick one up. So Angeline, can we start by you sharing a little bit about your work, about the setting, and about the protagonist, Perry?
All right. Bonjour, Anine. Hello, everyone. Angeline Bully. So I pitched my follow-up novel as Indigenous Lara Croft, but instead of raiding tombs, the main character is raiding museums and private collections to retrieve ancestral remains and sacred items that do not belong in museums. And she's 16 years old, so of course none of her heists go as she plans. It was such a pleasure to write a character that was so different from the protagonist in my first book, Firekeeper's Daughter, which I pitched as Indigenous Nancy Drew meets 21 Jump Street. I'm all about the pitch. And Warrior Girl Unearthed, it takes place 10 years after the event. So you meet the twin, Donis's twin nieces. And 10 years later, they're 16 years old, and it was a pleasure to return back to Sugar Island and have some familiar faces pop up, even though this can be a standalone story.
Thank you. Amélie, can you share about Song of Silver, Flame Like Night, its setting, and discuss your protagonist, Lan?
Absolutely, and it is such a pleasure to be here at the National Book Festival with so many amazing readers. Song of Silver, Flame Like Night is my book based on Chinese mythology and history. It is an epic fantasy, but it didn't start out that way. So growing up in Beijing, I would visit my grandmother's, what we call 四合院, or courtyard house. And I noticed that she liked to keep her belongings and her clothing in these little cloth bundles. And at the time, I was like, well, my grandma really likes cloth. Like, this is great. And it wasn't until I grew up a little bit more that I realized that these were the little bundles that she had to make when she was fleeing war and turmoil when she was growing up as a war orphan. So that was when I realized the histories that we read in textbooks are not so far from us. They are living and they're breathing, and they're a part of our lives. So Song of Silver, Flame Like Night is set in and inspired by the century of humiliation that China went through, starting with the Opium Wars, and then when the West and the Allied forces decided to break up the country and kind of draw out little slots like pies and take pieces of it. And then when the Japanese forces decided to wage war on our land, and my grandmother went through the tail end of that. And so I wanted to write kind of a tribute to the perseverance of the Chinese people, having gone through so much war, so much regime change, and just really celebrate our culture and the fact that, we're here today.
Thank you. Both of your protagonists, they have special talents. Best fisher, amazing voice. Everyone has special talents, some waiting to be discovered. This year's festival has a theme, Everyone Has a Story. Let's delve a little more into your unique stories. your cultural perspective that you bring, how you've included aspects of your own personal story. You've already started to discuss it a little bit. But if you can think a little bit about, and start with Angeline, thinking about how you've incorporated your personal culture, tradition, language, and your tradition of storytelling into your work.
Well, I love to include Anishinaabe in my story, and that's what we Ojibwe people call our language. And what was interesting, I don't provide translations or a glossary in the back. I feel like I want to center the book in a native gaze, and to do otherwise isn't telling the story that as I want it told. And that if I do a good enough job as an author and provide context, that you can glean the meanings. And so for Perry, she has been raised with the language, and she's functionally fluent. So the use of the language in my second book is much more conversational that she has with other people, whereas in my first book it was more Daunis used the language to pray and was not as confident in conversation. And I just love, learning from my teachers, my dad and other cultural teachers that I go to, and really learning about, I supervised our cultural staff when I worked for my tribe, and I learned about repatriations and how difficult it was for our tribe to, there's a federal law in place, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act of 1990. And at first they anticipated it would take 10 years to return all the human remains in museums and institutions back to the tribes that have been requesting them. And instead we are 33 years into it, and there are still more ancestors remaining in museum collections than have been repatriated. And so this injustice, I really wanted this young woman to just learn about it and be outraged. And when you're 16, you don't necessarily think about the consequences. And so I wanted her to have this call to activism and not go about it in the right way, being very impatient and kind of the lessons learned along the way.
Meli, while creating this magical world, you've incorporated elements of, I believe, Taoism, Chinese culture, and history. Can you speak a little bit about your goals in that and how you created this incredible world that is so captivating and brings us on this journey into Chinese history and mythology?
Yeah, and I really identified with what Angeline said about, not providing a glossary, not defining, and just centering it in, our gaze. I think Song of Silver, Flame Like Night is exactly that. It is an examination of the external colonial forces that have impacted China and its peoples in the past hundreds of years, but also the internal imperialism and regime changes that my people have gone through too. And so it's above all a celebration of our cultures and the traditions and the myriads of peoples that make up us today. And I wrote this book during the pandemic when I was unable to go back to China to visit my entire family there. And I was just really homesick. It came from a place of homesickness above all. And it started out in a colonized version of Hong Kong that drew from my husband's homeland. But it very quickly went back into the stories and the fantasies that I'd grown up with, which we call the wuxia and xianxia genres in Chinese literature, with all the demons and monsters and mythological creatures. So we follow Lan as she grows up with this, in this conquered world, and she journeys into a kind of discovery of her own history and her own identity, and how her own rulers have impacted that throughout. So it goes from external to internal, and it comes with so much mythology and magic as we journey through the kingdom.
Lie. Let's talk about lie. So both of your books portray strong women, young women, who are on a journey of self-discovery. Your characters, Perry and Lan, have sass, they can be cheeky. Why do they lie? And do the ends justify the means?
Sometimes. Well, Perry's 16. She sometimes does not think about the consequences. And she doesn't view it as lying. She views it as selective omission of critical facts that, and so, you know, she tries to rationalize her way with her behavior. And it was fun to write her. It's such a heavy topic, repatriation of Native remains and Native items in museums, that I really wanted a protagonist that had a lightness, a natural humor, being sassy, to really balance the intense elements of the story. And so, yep, she lies because sometimes that's just what she has to do to, with her, in these heists that she is so committed to doing.
Thank you.
I love that. I love how you said, these are such heavy topics, right? And adding fun and light and humor to our protagonists as they, navigate these themes and explore throughout the book was important to me. In terms of lying, Lan, so she grew up as a survivor. Her home was invaded and her mother killed when she was 7 years old, and she's had to survive through a conquered land. A big theme of Song of Silver, Flame Like Night, is hope. And Lan's story starts when her dying mother burns a tattoo in Hin or Chinese characters that she can't read onto her arm. For 12 years, the story starts when she's 19, for 12 years, she's been looking for the meaning of this tattoo, the last thing that her dying mother gave her. And she thinks that it has something to do with the ancient magic and the gods of her lands and her people. But she doesn't want to believe it because she's been living in a conquered land for so long. She doesn't want to believe there's hope. And so in the beginning, she lies not only to externally to the colonizers, but to herself as well. She doesn't want to believe there is hope. But secretly, she's been searching for the meaning of this magic for so long. And part of it is just her unraveling the lie and discovering her own identity and claiming it as she journeys into a world of the ancient magic of her people that she thought was forgotten. So I think survival and embracing your identity are parts of the reasons that Lan lies to other people and to herself at first.
Fight the power. So the characters in both of your stories, they both experience trauma or tragedy, much of which can actually be rooted in colonialization. While fictional characters in a fictional story, they're fighting for social issues. And that's what's so exciting about both of your books, right? Is that you pick up a fiction book and all of a sudden you are dropped into learning about so much more. These women are fighting for dignity and respect of their cultures, traditions, and values. Amélie, when Lan, she lost her mother, her friends, she was homeless, struggling through sexual assault. How does this tragedy shape her, and how does she fight?
I think exploring trauma is always just such a hard topic, but it came from a very personal place. Growing up those Sundays in my grandma's courtyard, listening to her stories that were, can be heavy, but that she told to us as children because we have to know them. And so a lot of the experiences of being an orphan and fleeing and being homeless under all the turmoil of that was early 1900s China was just, it just shaped her as a person. But in her old age, she was one of the happiest people I knew. She was able to smile and laugh, and she always tried to feed me extra dumplings at the dinner table. And so I think that for me, it was important to write someone that can find joy in the darkness and find the hope when often it's lost. I think it's a theme that I try to incorporate into all of my young adult books is the message of hope and the message that, the world can be dark, but you have to fight for the light. And so that's what Lan does. She reclaims her magic. She never gives up hope, despite not believing in it at first. And she enters the world of her people's old magic, and she starts to reclaim it.
Well, similarly, that hope is never lost with Perry. Perry also experiences trauma. She's seen ancestors' bones is a big trauma for her. The disregard for the Native American Graves Protection Repatriation Act, and then the impact of the missing and murdered Indigenous women in her own community. How does this trauma also influence her, and how is she really fighting? And then also, can we talk about Turtle just a little?
So Perry says to one of her mentors at some point, she's just overwhelmed by the heaviness of the work that is repatriations, and also the women that keep going missing in her community, Native women. And she says, do you know how exhausting it is to be part of an endangered species? Like both past and present were endangered. And for her, she wants to protect her community. She wants to right wrongs and call out injustice. And some of her attempts are misguided, but they're always from a good place. And then when she realizes who some of the actual enemies are, and there's betrayal, and I think that's an important part of young adulthood, is grappling with that when people turn out to be less than what you expected or hoped for them. And so her first mentor is someone named Cooper Turtle, and he works at the Tribal Museum, and he assigns her reading assignments, and she kind of protests because the font is so small and there's not enough pictures and that, but he really listens to her. He gives her a task of going onto eBay and searching for Ojibwe items that are being listed, and then he talks to her about that. And it's a very safe place for her to be able to, like, sometimes she swears, sometimes she's very angry, and he listens and he guides her in such a gentle way. But he's always about following the rules. And so she grows impatient with him, thinking he's too much of a rule follower, and the situation calls for a renegade to do a heist. So yeah.
Well, so we think about gatekeeping. Perry and Lan are not afraid to stand up for what they believe. And each of them really, they want to help their people, their communities. Can you share an example of how your heroines exhibit their power and gatekeep?
I'm still thinking. But I think what Angeline just said, about teenagers growing up, the whole experience of just fighting for what you believe in, but also having to navigate through the world that's built by adults and
Yeah.
sometimes being let down by the system is just so central to a lot of young adult books. With Lan, she goes from thinking that, she's powerless. She works at a Chinese tea house that's been co-opted by her conquerors. She's indentured there, and she's got to, work for her next scrap of food. But she goes from a state of powerlessness to really finding that power, that magic that's been passed down from her ancestors, and being like, we have to fight for our kingdom. She also goes from discovering her own history that, what she sees today is the external colonizers from across the sea. But really, there's already been a history of imperialism within that has shaped and erased a part of her history and some of her peoples. And she wants to bring that to light. And a part of that is working with the mysterious practitioner boy who comes from the very opposite background, and being able to, show that to the world and bring it back to the world.
And I think for Perry, part of that journey is maybe in reverse. She is so quick to want to do everything all at once, and it takes her learning some painful lessons to realize that perhaps Cooper's approach, that there is meaning in how you accomplish the goals. And when you're working with our ancestors, returning our ancestors, the way in which you conduct yourself matters. In terms of gatekeeping, I think, in the beginning of the story, she, doesn't put up with stuff, and she will call people out on things. And throughout the story, she gradually comes to be a more accepting and inclusive person, in that a person that she does not care for, another fellow intern who really ticked her off earlier in the book. He is the first person that comes upon her. She trips over a dead body, like a fresh dead body, and he's so shaken up by it, as is she. And she tells him how doing a sweat lodge with her dad and some other things that she turned to with her cultural practices, that really helped her get through this trauma. And he doesn't have that cultural background, and so she invites him to meet with her dad, and that was like a big step for her to not hold on to grudges, and to see that he's a person that is trying, and that she was going to be the bigger person in that moment. And so when we tell stories, hoping, with young people, when they're first inspired by something and they want to be very, that call to activism, I don't want people to burn out. I don't want them to feel that they have to sacrifice so much in pursuit of their goals. Our ancestors sacrificed a lot, and they want us to live full, vibrant lives. And so I don't want a young reader to feel as if they need to set themselves on fire to keep a cause warm.
It's heavy, but it's amazing, and it's needed in our society. All right, we've talked a lot about our protagonists. I'm really curious to know, besides the protagonist, who was your favorite character in your book?
Mine is a teen mom named Chauncey. And so Perry is part of a tribal internship program, and she's paired on this team. They call themselves the Misfit Toys. And Chauncey is this teen mom, and she's a really good mom. And she on a hike to search for evidence for something, and she has to stop and breastfeed her baby. And there's just this like normalness about her, and you know, I wanted to show a more positive image of single, you know, a teen mom. And so she was my and she's very funny too. And so her friendship with Perry, I just love those times that they're together in the car, and that wonderful native humor that comes out, and yeah, so.
Mine would have to be, besides Lan, Zen, the other main character. Hopefully it's not cheating, but it was just so much fun to play off kind of the themes of yin yang, or two halves making a whole that these two main characters portray. One, you have Lan, who doesn't even really believe in the old magic of her world, and then you have Zen, who has been arduously holding on, and he's been training in the last kind of martial arts temple that remains in this kingdom. And he's the one who shows her into this whole new world. I think they come together, and then they have very separate or seemingly separate ideals. And watching them discover that and piece together their history together, and then discuss what the path forward should be, what is the right course of action. Do the ends justify the means, and how many lives should be lost in a war to reclaim their kingdom? I think those are heavy topics that they deal with, but also amidst moments of light. Zen is just very serious, and Lan is just so cheeky. I don't know if you guys have heard of the Grumpy Sunshine duo, but they're definitely that. It was just so great to have him lecture to her, you know, these are like the Confucian analects, and then she's like, "You're such a rat fart, like, stop lecturing me." So it was so fun balancing the duo and having them come together to play off each other.
Okay, so I thought we could talk a little bit about your creative process, because your characters, both of your characters, I mean, you just talked about your second favorite character, and your characters are all so developed. And I found myself thinking of these people as my friends. I mean, it's probably great. Every time I read a book, I'm like, oh, I'm friends with right? I have lots of friends. But all of that being said, let's talk about your creative process, your research, and how you go about it. And I thought we could start by talking a little bit about even the quotes you include. So before every chapter, there is, or section, there's a quote by someone, and can you talk about where you found them, why you included them, why they were important to you?
Sure. So the book takes place over the summer, over a 10-week summer internship program. So at the beginning of each week, I include it's an epigraph, a quote, and so just like Cooper Turtle assigned Perry a list of resources for her to become familiar. She calls it being a repatriation Jedi. And so he gives his Padawan a list of resources for her to read. Those are all resources that I read. And there were some quotes that, you know, where Shannon O'Loughlin, who is the executive director of the Association on American Indian Affairs, wrote a letter to the president of Harvard and said, there are more dead natives in your museum than have been alive and attending your campus. And those were just powerful, almost like a punch to start that week off, that these situations are real. And in, I guess, the most intense research that I did, I went to Germany. I was invited to attend a literary festival, and I took the opportunity to go to a museum that still has scalps and ancestral remains on display. And it took my tribe 10 years of relationship building before we were able to repatriate, because NAGPRA, the repatriations law, is federal U.S. law. It does not pertain to private collections, and it does not pertain internationally. And so my tribe had to do a lot of work, relationship building, in order to retrieve our ancestor. And I wanted to see that museum for myself to see if it was as bad as I had been told, and it was.
Thank you. Molly?
Yeah, the quotes in front of my chapters were so much fun and to sprinkle in. The Song of Silver Flame Like Night just draws upon, all of like Chinese history and culture, and as well as the works and principles of scholars that have come before. And researching that, I luckily had texts from my parents in China to read over and really ruminate over the original untranslated versions, and being able to draw from those sources and to make them into something that is semi-fictional but is very, very real was just an incredible experience. A lot of these come from, for example, the Confucian Analects, the Art of War, principles of Taoism and Buddhism, and being able to draw inspiration from those and create it into my second world it was like an added bonus or a little treat kind of for the readers who might connect to it, or readers who might see this quote and be like, let me do some more research into that. So.
And can I drill down? So did you pick them after or along the way? So and that question can go for both of you, but did they inspire your work as you were writing the chapters, or when the chapters were done, did you go back and put them in?
So the way I built this book was I literally wrote like a fictionalized versions or condensed versions of some famous ancient Chinese works, and just wrote quotes, some inspired by some principles in there and some honestly made up because there's magic in this book. And then going back into the scenes and looking into, what cultural aspects, what, religious or semi-religious aspects, what pillars can I add into this, and how can I summarize that in the chapter heading in a single quote. So it went along the way. For some chapters, I just couldn't think of one at the start, and I went back and wove in some other quotes, but it was very much just weaving and layering it as I went.
And what about you, Angeline?
As I did more research, I would, go through my draft and enhance. I would learn about different real situations that have happened with people who do the repatriations work. And so learning that there actually was a professor in Indiana that had a cereal box that was full of teeth, indigenous teeth. Human remains stored in banana boxes and written on in Sharpie. These are atrocities that continue to happen by people who supposedly revere the knowledge of why they're studying our bones. And I also learned I first learned about the actual warrior girl. So there is an ancestor who was buried with a flint blade, and she was a teenage year. She was post-puberty, but hadn't been pregnant. They can tell from the hips and that. Anyway, and she was buried with a flint blade, and it was unusual for a female to be buried with a sacred item like that. And so they gleaned that she must have been a protector in her community because she had knitting of bones where they could tell previous knife injuries that had healed, and then they could tell the injury that most likely had killed her. And that's really where I took the inspiration to, when Perry meets this warrior girl in a museum archive and is just, wants to steal her right then and there. And so, yeah.
But the warrior girl joins her throughout this story in different ways. Yes. She's writing habits. Are there any writing habits or creative things you do as you write?
I always, my sister hates it when I'm in drafting mode because I pull down the curtains and I close my door and I turn off the lights and it's all dark and I'm in my world of mythological monsters and demon gods. So it definitely has to be dark and I have to have music on. I have soundtracks for all my different books. So that's number 2. And by my side, almost like, I don't know, a religious book, I have certain Chinese works. The most recent one is Classic of Mountains and Seas, or Shan Hai Jing, which is an accumulation, a real accumulation of mythological creatures that these various ancient scholars put together in ancient China. And there are real fantastical creatures. It is a real book. And it just makes me think, you know, am I actually writing fiction or could this have been real at some point? So it's always there just like as a little like token of inspiration as I journey into my own world of fantastical beasts and gods.
So as you go into this world, is this a world you always knew you wanted to create? Did you always know you wanted to be a writer?
Yeah, since I was young, I loved telling stories. My mom told me I was the weird kid who sat all her little stuffed animals in a row and would, you know, tell them stories. My first readers right there. And growing up, just it felt to me like it's a part of like breathing or drinking water. I work a totally different career in finance, but I always came back to storytelling and to writing. So I've always wanted to write stories.
Angela?
For me, it was, I did not set out to be a storyteller. I had the idea for my book when I was 18, but I didn't start writing until I was 44 and in the throes of a midlife crisis in which I realized I could live with the regret of a bad draft, or I could live with failure easier than regret. To try and fail was okay, but to never put myself out there, I didn't want that. You know, my second book, I wrote on deadline, and it was hard. It was 1 year of really difficult. I, too, draft with a character playlist. So if I feel like when I am creating characters, if I know what music they listen to, then I really have more insight into the character. And the Walmart has a special edition of my book that includes Perry's Summer of Slack playlist. But when I'm editing, this is my own like version of the Pomodoro method, because 20 minutes in and I'm just getting started. So I listen to the soundtrack for the movie Interstellar, and it's just one continuous piece of music that's like an hour and a half or 2 hours. Like it's you know, lengthy, but there's something that just pulls me in, and my mind can focus in a different way when I'm editing versus when I'm drafting. So I go through one cycle of the soundtrack, and then I take a break, and then do that again.
So what are you working on now?
Well, it hasn't been formally announced yet, but
We won't tell anyone.
I am working on my third book, and my stories follow the elements. So my first, Firekeeper's Daughter, element of fire. Second, element of earth, returning ancestors to the earth. My next book will be about air and about the children who are taken from our communities when the Indian Child Welfare Act is not followed.
Wow. Well, we're looking forward to reading it?
Oh my gosh, I can't believe they're the elements, like warrior, okay. I was just like, oh my gosh. That is so amazing, I look forward. I'm on deadline for the sequel to Song of Silver, Flame Like Night. It is just as a mouthful to pronounce. It is Dark Star Burning, Ash Falls Light. They're made in the traditional Chinese like rhyming couplets type, and I have the first pass pages due next Tuesday, which is when it's first laid out in the story form or in the actual book form, and you have the title page and graphics, and it looks beautiful. I'm also working on, also unannounced, but the first book in my next series, which is a dark Chinese fantasy romance, and it's been so fun to write. It's the fastest I've drafted anything, and I'm literally, I think, 3,000 words from being done with the first draft.
Oh, that's amazing. All right, so we are going to start to take Q&A if there are any. And if there aren't, I can ask more questions. But I wanted to give everyone here an opportunity to ask the authors questions. Any questions? Yes.
I have a question for both of you based on a comment that Angeline made. You had mentioned when talking about the protagonist or the antagonist to your story, Chauncey?
Chauncey.
Chauncey,
friend.
okay, about her being really funny. Keeping in mind that you are the person who created her personality, do you both create or start with one character and find that as you give that character life, it changes either the way they behave or even changes the story as you go from what you had originally envisioned or drafted?
Sure, and as more details seem, it's kind of like the character reveals itself, and through the different drafts that I do, and more details just seem to fit so well. It doesn't feel like creating a character, it feels more like discovering that character, who they always were.
Okay, same?
For me, I always use the analogy that when I first start a new series or world, I'm putting on a pair of new shoes. I am discovering the character. And as I write, as I draft, and as I form their interactions to the story, the shoes get worn in and my feet are more comfortable. And at the very end, they are a part of me. As weird as that sounds, I can envision the characters. Usually by the end, I know exactly what the characters from my first series and Song of Silver, Flame Like Night, how they're going to react to certain situations. So they kind of become a part of you. It's a really weird thing as an author. It sounds so strange, but you have all these people living in your head from the past and present. And it's a process of discovery.
I like the shoe metaphor. Thank you very much. Thanks.
I also have a Pinterest page for each of my books.
Yeah.
And so I've picked dream cast members and outfits for certain scenes. And so, yeah, the creativity
Love that. Yes.
I had a question about the kind of gatekeeping. You both your books tie from very traditional and cultural aspects of your own background and heritage. Do you find it kind of hard balancing what stories to tell and what kind of traditions to omit and kind of keep sacred to yourself while writing?
Definitely. I'm answerable to my community, to my family. And so I made a decision that I would not include actual ceremony because I don't feel I have that right to share it outside of ceremony. And I think each Indigenous author has to figure out where they draw that line of, I had a mantra while I was writing, and it was, I write to preserve my culture and I edit to protect it. And so it's write freely, and then it's during the revision stage that I think about, do I need to include this? Or is this better left off the page. So.
For me, I think it's always just easier to write from a personal place, just knowing that you come from a place of care and that you have a personal and spiritual connection to the characters and the histories and traditions that you're writing. I think for me, writing a book about, Chinese culture in today's geopolitical world is especially important to me to just, show to the rest of the world that, we are a people and we have our own cultures and we have personalities, and we're not just what you read on the news. So just celebrating us as a people and what, the rich history we come from was so important to me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My wife and I listened to the audiobooks of Firekeeper's Daughter and Warrior Girl Unearthed, and your writing lends itself so beautiful to an oral intake. But also the reader was phenomenal. I was wondering, were you involved in selecting the reader for your audiobooks?
I was. Usually debut authors don't get that kind of input, but I was able to let my publisher know that I really wanted an Ojibwe, an indigenous narrator. And so we put out like a huge net, posted on all the social medias calling for indigenous narrators, no experience necessary. I got to listen to all of the 5-minute samples, and the instant I heard Isabella Starr LeBlanc, she sounded the way Daunis sounds in my head. And it was her very first audiobook that she did, and she has since done several others. And then she returned and did my second book, Warrior Girl, and just what an incredible talent. And her elders sound the way the elders sound in my community. She got the cadences and everything. It was really good.
It's amazing. Go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't
Yes.
want to comment. I have to underline that, the audiobooks were phenomenal. This is also a question for Angeline. As someone who comes from a museum background and is working in libraries, I'm curious what message you would want to share for those of us who work with cultural heritage and are, new people in the field of museum and cultural heritage.
Really, it's to follow NAGPRA to the spirit of the law instead of there are ways of delaying and separating, designating something as culturally unaffiliated, and then that can be a catch-all that sometimes museum staff use, because if they can't decide what tribe to repatriate to, they get to hold on to the sacred items, which is what they really want to hold on to. So there's those things, and reach out to tribes, reach out to the Association on American Indian Affairs, and other places. There's resources listed in my book for you to reach out to. I also forgot to mention on the what are you working on, I sold the film rights for Firekeeper's Daughter to the Obamas. And so with the writer's strike, everything is on pause, and I fully support the writer's strike. And once we get issues resolved that address use of AI and streaming residuals and the way the industry has changed, I'm looking forward to being an executive producer on Firekeeper's Daughter, the series for Netflix.
I have a question for both of you, or each of you, I suppose. Whether when you're creating characters and when you're continuing characters from a previous book, is it easier to be creating somebody from scratch, and do you feel confined by what you've already created with a continuing character, or does it not make that much difference because they're all there revealing themselves to you anyway?
I think it's a great question. For me, being on my third series, that's one of the key questions that I'm asking myself is, do I tend to write certain characters? But I think with every story, the characters and as a person, your history and your life circumstances shape you and shape, your goals, your desires, your motivations, and the fears, and all those interact with how the character is going to interact with the world and choose the choices or make the choices that she does or they do in the books. So it's always a new process of discovering and just layering in pieces and different parts of the worlds and the themes that we want to explore. So they tend to come out differently, even if they hold different little pieces of us as the authors.
Rather than answer, because she gave a great answer, I'd like to give one last question opportunity.
I was wondering, so for both of your books, or I guess how many characters you've written, how much do you feel that the characters are I guess a part of your personality that kind of bleeds through into the books?
For my first book, Daunis is very much like me. Aunt Teddy, her aunt, is very much like me. In my second book, Perry is the complete opposite of me. Perry is the cool girl that I wished I could have been in high school, and so yeah.
I love that. I think being able to write different characters, it's like the people I wish I could be, or sometimes the people I really don't want to be as well. But I think every character has a little piece of me in them, whether it's, they love to eat pork dumplings, or, they love to poke fun at their partner and significant other. So I think they all have little crumbs as to how much that's up to the author to write and differentiate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So like Perry and Team Misfits and Lon and her fellow young practitioners, young people have an opportunity to make a difference and stand up against improper power. As adults, we need to remember to encourage and empower the young people around us. Much of this starts with being curious, reading, learning, and challenging the status quo. I call all of you to do that as we read their books and as we continue to be curious. Thank you.
Oh, what a pleasure.